future of connectivity.
We're redefining what Converge can do.
Expanding innovation. It's not just about products, it's about partnerships, innovation, and delivering beyond expectations. Let's innovate. Let's grow. Let's converge.
This is where the digital world converges. Conversations on the Cloud, a series of BusinessWorld B-Side episodes in partnership with Converge Global Business. I am your host, Beatriz Cruz, multimedia reporter from BusinessWorld. For this episode, we would like to understand and appreciate how in-country cloud benefits a nation in terms of security, costs, and efficiency, and what should stakeholders do now in having its in-country cloud. We are joined here by a tech entrepreneur and executive from Converge, and a privacy and data protection lawyer and official from the National Privacy Commission. James Mendoza is a technology entrepreneur who is currently the CEO of Converge Studios, Converge Ventures' latest innovation company focused in servicing Converge's cloud initiatives and projects. In 2014, he founded the cloud services company Marinas Studios. He has since grown the company into one of the country's leading premier Google Cloud service providers, serving both the public sector and enterprise segments. In 2018, James also co-founded HealthBlocks, now one of the leading SaaS-based clinic management system providers in the country, and Ticket2Me, today recognized as one of the most used fully digital ticketing solutions in the Philippines. Meanwhile, Attorney Jose Belarmino II is the Deputy Commissioner at the National Privacy Commission. As Deputy Commissioner, he is committed to promoting regulatory innovation while safeguarding data subject rights and ensuring the responsible, ethical use of personal data in the digital age. He previously served as Head Executive Assistant to the Commissioner and Chairman, and then the Officer in Charge Executive Director of NPC, as well as the Director of Global Privacy for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa at Marriott International, the world's biggest hotel chain. Sir James and Depcom Jose, welcome to Business World B-Side.
Thank you for having us, Bea.
Thank you for having us, Bea. Good morning to all the viewers on B-Side.
All right, it's no secret that the Philippines' digital transformation journey has come so far, but it's still a relatively young player compared to its ASEAN counterparts. And of course, to be able to become a strong digital player in the region, infrastructure is very important. So what are the risks to having your data merely in an offshore cloud infrastructure?
Okay, sure. Okay, that's a great question, Bea. No? I'll take like a few steps back, and basically, give a horizon of why we are here today. I think many of the digital transformation projects in the country today have been kickstarted and really put into hyper mode during the pandemic, right? Everybody realized that you can do a lot of things more digitally, more in the cloud, compared to the old traditional ways of it being done, and the pandemic really changed that. So the past 5 6 years, we've seen a lot of organizations, private and public sector, move a lot of their workloads to the cloud. But in the last 12 to 18 months, because of a lot of geopolitical tensions, many organizations now are rethinking that strategy. That now people are now more questioning, where is really my data, where is the processing happening, and how much of those things can I repatriate back into my country to do more of the processing and computing here.
Got that. And the Pomuse, as part of the government, you also see all of the cybersecurity risks that are happening. So what are the implications of having your data stored on an offshore cloud?
No, that's right, Ben, and I agree with James. But I'm coming from the fact that when it comes to, of course, when you do an offshore hosting, we're talking about transfer of data from the Philippines to a different jurisdiction. So there are quite a number of risks associated in doing that. One is, of course, control or the lack of control um, to our data. Meaning to say, when you transfer your data, when it's hosted abroad, then the Philippines no longer has exclusive legal and organizational reach. Plus, apart from that, you then expose these data to legal access regimes of that particular country, meaning to say by a court order or by their privacy law or by another legal instrument, uh, that jurisdiction could actually access the personal data of individuals. There's also the risk in terms of continuity. Let's say there's a disruption that happens abroad. It's actually being transferred to the Philippines in a sense that then our services they get disrupted because we rely on this infrastructure. It's like we're importing the disruption in the Philippines, even if our local frameworks and systems and network are actually functioning okay or well. I'd also like to highlight what you mentioned, James, about confidence. I say it as confidence because I think data sovereignty or having your data hosted onshore as compared to having your data hosted offshore, that also increases or decreases the confidence of the citizens of the country. So it's not just a matter of technical issue, but also it's a question of perception and assurance, as James mentioned. How can we know where our data is? Who has access to these data? What can we get back? What are the security measures being imposed? And that relates to compliance issues as well, because when you transfer data abroad, there's a lot of players. And I just want to clarify that it's not illegal per se. In fact, that's allowed under the law. But the question is, or it becomes more complicated rather, because you now have a lot of different players. You have the controllers, you have the processors, you have sub-processors. Now, this entails a lot of governance structure in terms of making sure that your measures are there, contracts are in place, and the ultimate question is who's liable. I mean, under the law, it's still the controller, but that has an impact now because the breach happened in a different country. Who has access to the audit trails? There's a whole host of things that affect the compliance of companies that are in the Philippines but data are posted offshore.
And mine's be last year, there were several global cloud outages that happened, and it affected others in the Philippines. It affected financial services, healthcare. So, what steps should we take in terms of adopting a local cloud infrastructure? Like, where are we now in terms of the adoption journey? What strategies should the Philippines consider?
Okay. So, to what Dep Comosa said, I want to hinge on that confidence. So, as you said also earlier, the Philippines is really very in its nascent stages in its digital transformation journey, which includes its ability to service, a cloud infrastructure in the country. Still very early stages, and right now we have very rudimentary challenges. Things like, so for you to have a proper cloud infrastructure in country, number one, you need real estate. Where will your data centers be? And in connection to that, you will need power. Data centers are very power hungry. That's why they are measured in megawatts or gigawatts, right? And then with that, of course, you will need your computing, right? And globally, because this is not just a realization by the Philippines, it's a global thing. There's actually a big shortage of semiconductors in the world. Your memory chips, your CPUs, your GPUs, there's a big backlog, right? Orders not being fulfilled. And then when you're done with computing, then you will need to have your abstraction. What will I run in this data centers, in this infrastructure that you've put in place? And then there's a question of economics. Does it make sense for a company, for example, to run a business around this infrastructure? Will they make money? When will they make money? How will they make money? And that connects to, of course, the economic model. You need to balance it also with security. Now, building it is one thing, having economic model is one thing, but security, how will you secure it? Not just physically, and not just digitally, but also throughout its operation. Running these things is a 24 by 7, 365 deal, right? That's why these big hyperscalers from both the east and the west, they've poured billions and billions of dollars into this infrastructure. We call it public cloud because it's really a very difficult thing to do. Now you put it now in the Philippine setting. Many of these moving parts need to make sense for it to be productive, and at the end of the day give back the confidence to the people that um, this is something that we can go back to. Because if we remember, before embracing public cloud, before bringing our data outside of the Philippines, we've been doing this computing for in-country computing for so long, but it just so happened that it's in the private data centers of various organizations, public and private. Now it's run by your system administrators. There's a small set of servers in the back office. They run it, backup, etc. So what I'm trying to say is we there's a lot of challenges in doing these things, and it needs to make a lot of sense before we can actually be very confident in doing it.
Cut that. And building on that, what is the call of the government in terms of its onshore or domestic cloud infrastructure? What is the move of the government? What are the strategies that it's looking to pencil?
Right. So, well, in addition to what James mentioned, and as to your question earlier, there have been steps. In fact, there's been an ongoing conversation at the side of the government in terms of onshore hosting. But before, or in addition to what James said, I think first the conversation is about what should be hosted onshore. The data that should be hosted onshore, because sovereignty, when you speak about data sovereignty, that's very different from localization. So sovereignty speaks about the ability of the country to exercise control and accountability over these data. But of course, not all types of data carry the same national risk. So there should be a framework, national framework, or data classification framework as to what should be hosted onshore, and what could be hosted offshore. So whether that's your sovereign critical data, whether that's your resilience critical data rather, or is it your commercial data, or is it your general data? So from the perspective of the commission, of course, it would be nice if we could have the sensitive ones and the sovereign critical data hosted in the country, because that carries a lot of risk. Mean to say, how can we control access and if in case there's a breach or an issue. But apart from that, the government is also working towards a regime of having controls and measures, as you've mentioned, as what James mentioned earlier. Apart from the infrastructure itself, which is also a question of land, and also a question of working with the energy sector, because it's a resource intensive. You may have an onshore cloud storage, but if you don't have power supply, then how would that work? It's also a question of connection. So as you may know, we already have a Konektadong Pinoy, which then encourages a lot of players to enter the market. But apart from that, it's going to be a investment on humans.
Correct.
I mean, the infrastructure won't function without any talents. It's going to be an investment on engineers, privacy engineers. You also need cloud specialists, and all this sort of very nuanced what do you call it, professions that would then take care of the infrastructure, because as what James mentioned, it's a whole year activity. It doesn't stop. It's not as if like during the weekends the things would close down. And so the government has been also investing on individuals. We have different types of scholarships to train people, and of course we're also working with the private sector to make sure that we don't only have the land, the space, the infrastructure, but also these individuals. So it's going to be an amalgamation of all of these things to make sure that we're on the right track. It's not as if we just want to build an infrastructure and that's it. So it's going to be a public-private partnership, I believe.
Yeah. I want to amplify to what Dapcomos has said, to put in some numbers, right? So the Philippines today has around 200 megawatts of computing capacity in country. So that translates to a number of private sector companies setting up, various data centers, mostly here in Luzon, some in Visayas and Mindanao. To put up 1 megawatt, you need to have to invest around $6 to $7 million per megawatt, right? And that's just for your infra, power, computing, security. To what Depcomos has said, does that not yet include, your manpower, the services to put in or migrate, workloads or applications, what have you, data into that infrastructure? Does it include yet how to manage its day-to-day operations 24/7, 365? So that's the amount of investment that needs to happen. And as you mentioned also earlier, in last year there's a lot of um, global scale outages that happened. Lot of big name brands that were involved. So the key question for us is, as we move it in country, how are we able to not completely remove but minimize those types of disruptions? Because if it's purely in country now, we're up to ourselves to secure it, make sure if there's an outage or issue, we're able to resolve it, and that's a big undertaking as well,
Right.
right? And if many of our projects nationally have been an indication, we need a lot of preparation to really operationalize such undertaking, both from the public sector and the private sector as well.
We wanted to focus on that, sir. So, if we're going to host or have a local cloud infrastructure, what are some of the risks or challenges that might come about, and how should we be ready for that? How is the Philippine government, how is the private sector going to prepare itself for that, for this big opportunity?
Okay. I want to go back to my number earlier, 200 megawatts, right? So that's the current capacity of the Philippines, mostly driven by private sector, right? But we want to um, question also the business model around that 200 megawatts, because from what we've analyzed in the industry, the target market for a bulk of those computing capability is actually targeted towards outside of the country businesses, meaning inviting hyperscalers to host their own data centers in the country, as an option to Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand, China, the US. We're positioning it as an alternative, right? But to Depcomos's point, it does not address the data sovereignty requirements of the Philippines. So I guess to that's my first question, I guess, for the private sector. What's the goal? Because I think we need to eat our dog poop, so to speak, right? Before we even try to offer it to foreign companies, right? With a lot of options globally where to put their next data center. I think we need to prove to ourselves and to them that we can actually do it, right? On the regulatory side and also as well on the investment side for private companies. So that's the first. So for me, I think that's a big risk, opening it up first to the broader global market without first, trying to really do it for a smaller scale, on a pilot scale, if you may, for local use cases, as Depcom also said, use cases that prove that we can be confident in delivering these use cases that really are intent for why you want to process data here. May be sensitive information, PII, dealing with PIIs, dealing with healthcare, dealing with top secret national information, those types of things. Having said that, part of the risk also is, you know, um, geographically we are a disaster prone country. So we may address many of the regulatory, technical, compliance risks, but there's still Mother Nature, right? How it's very difficult to predict where the next big national disaster will be, whether that's an earthquake, a typhoon, a fire, or a combination, or a volcano erupting, right? So those are, I think, some of the more rudimentary challenges and risks that I think we need to address before we even go full scale. The big, hairy, audacious goal actually for the private sector is to go to 1 gigawatt in the next 3 or 4 years. That's a big jump, right? I think that's a 4 or 5x jump from the current capacity today. But again, the fundamentals I think we need to establish before we even go to that audacious goal.
Speaking of fundamentals for the government side, Deb Kamose, what risks or challenges do you see in terms of adopting a local cloud infrastructure type?
I think whether it's from the government or in the private sector, I think really the question that we need to answer is what's really our goal with wanting to have an onshore um cloud storage or hosting, because I think the biggest complication would come from the fact that we would try to copy or emulate the hyperscales abroad.
Mm.
Because the question is, do we have the capacity, whether that's financial capacity, that's um infrastructure, that's human capital, and even the capacity to, regulate ourselves. Because of course we have different laws that would regulate data storage. That includes the Data Privacy Act. But it's also a question of, do we need more regulations, or do we need to actually lessen the regulations um, to encourage more, I don't know, investment or capacity building? So the risk is really if we're not intentional and deliberate as to our goal. As you mentioned earlier, before we even offer it to the bigger market, I think we have to make sure that we're ready in the Philippines, in the local parlance, and in the exigencies of the country. Um, are we going to focus in just one city, or is it going to be multi-regional? Because if it's going to be in one city, then if there's a disruption in that particular city, that stops everything, as compared to if it's going to be multi-regional. But then again, you have the question of typhoon coming in different regions in different months. So these are the things that we have to consider. I think both, whether it's an offshore and onshore, it has its risk. It's just riskier onshore because we still don't have the infrastructure, whether that's the data center itself or the energy infrastructure. And remember, not all regions of the country are well powered.
Correct.
Not all regions in the country have great connections. So these are the things that would impact uh reaching that level of being able to provide that service both to the public sector and to the private sector.
At hindi ka masay. Now, in terms of earlier, I wanted to circle back on what you mentioned of classifying the data that you need to post on like at a local posting of onshore cloud infrastructure. You specifically mentioned on sensitive data. So I just wanted to clarify that. How will a local cloud infrastructure ensure cybersecurity and cyber resilience and the reliability? And given that, of course, with digital transformation coming in, it also brings in a lot of cybersecurity risks. It brings a lot of exposure to many of our users' data online that can be hacked or can be used to hackers and attackers' advantages. So, what are your thoughts?
I mean, the answer to technology risk is also technology. You of course you have to have a framework that's robust, meaning to say you have to have your data loss prevention tools. You have to have your baselines, whether that's encryption, multi-factor authentication, zero trust, all of these measures that would ensure, because, and I don't know, James, if you'd agree, but I don't think there's going to be there's 100% security. I don't think there will ever be a system that's 100% secured, because all these cyber threat actors would find ways
Correct.
to enter your system, exfiltrate data. So the way to combat that is to really intensify and make your security measures and tools as robust as it can be. And of course, you have to make sure that you do this on a quarterly basis, just to check if there are vulnerabilities. because these threat actors, they always try to find ways on how they could penetrate their system, whether that's through the actual system or through individuals. They try to find weaknesses within your environment. Again, that's whether it's your online environment or your physical environment. These are openings that could be used. So it really is a matter of strengthening your security measures. I mean, with artificial intelligence in place being used by threat actors, we could also use
Hmm.
artificial intelligence to combat these attacks. Although, of course, they have an advantage because they're not regulated. It's easy for them to act and use any tools as compared to us and to the would-be providers of onshore cloud hosting, because they're subjected to certain regulations. So there's a bit of a delay in there. But yeah, I think it will always be a question of, do you have the tools? Do you have the measures? Do you have your trainings? Uh, Not just for the people that are directly involved, but also for the people that you know are working but has a tangentially impacts the environment. So
From the private sector's perspective, if we're going to have onshore cloud hosting here, what are the security measures that need to be in place to ensure that we're going to do something like this? Uh, it has to be cyber secure and cyber resilient.
Okay. For me, it always starts with PPT, people, process, and technology, right? As Depcom has said, there is no perfect cybersecurity setup or security setup for that matter. If a vendor or a salesperson tells you that that person is lying or overselling, right? Having said that, you need to have that trifecta, right? You need to have the right people in place, right competencies in place, right? And those people will need to have the right processes in place, need to implement the right protocols, procedures, and get acquainted with the industry best practices. And of course, those two will need to be supported with technology, right? Um, Technology is very, very, very fast changing nowadays. Literally every day, there's a new set of technologies that are in place. So we need to be abreast. The technology tools that protect us 1 year ago may be already irrelevant today as we speak, because as Depcom has said, the threat actors or the malicious individuals, they're not stopping, right? They're not regulated, and they're there to really make sure that they're able to exploit vulnerabilities and really extract as much information or as much resources from that vulnerability, right? So having said that, in terms of securing, for example, a private company wanting to set up its own data center infrastructure. For me, it starts with the having the right number one, um, baseline infrastructure in place. That's your um, connectivity. That's your physical data center. And of course, it's very important to have a third party, do the right audit, for that particular setup. For example, here at Converge, when we were building our data centers and our cloud infrastructure, you need to go to the right validation agency. For us, we went to Uptime Institute, right? So they are a globally accepted third party, verification company that validates data centers worldwide for their compliance, right? For their ability to be up for a certain number of time during the year, making sure that their designs and redundancies are in place. And that includes your cybersecurity and security infrastructure in place. So having that badge, having some a third party auditor, so to speak, to validate the approach is very, very important, because as we said earlier, we as a country is fairly new to this, and we need to learn how it's being done globally, and borrow from the best practices and learn from the mistakes that those implementations have suffered in the past.
So sorry, it's a good thing you mentioned physical, because we always forget na our data centers could be attacked.
Correct.
Yeah, they could just, I don't know.
Yes, it's
They
an
don't follow
acknowledge.
the actual equipment. So you also have to have that physical measure. It just reminded me of what you said.
Mm.
Since we're talking about the components of having a local cloud hosting or like a cloud provider, um, what are the or how could domestic cloud infrastructure realistically improve cost predictability for businesses?
Hmm. Sir.
I think, when you have an onshore cloud hosting, that opens up visibility. Meaning to say, predictability happens when you have visibility. Visibility of what? What are the sources of your cost? Whether that's your compute, whether that's your storage, is it your compliance cost? Is it your egress cost? So in situations where the hosting happens offshore, companies here they have very limited visibility when it comes to these things. So say for an example, um, this would predict and also improve cost. Let's say when your latency is low, you don't need to over provision in terms of your compute because the response is very quick. As compared to when it's happening abroad, the return sometimes is quite long because your latency is high. So then again, you have to over provision in terms of your cloud computing to make sure that your systems and your processes are functioning in an acceptable manner or scale. Um, Predictability could also happen because, of course, if it's onshore, now then your compliance costs, you're able to predict these costs. You no longer have to hire foreign lawyers when it comes to reviewing your clauses in terms of the data transfer that's abroad. And we know how costly foreign counsels are. And apart from that, you're also reducing your cost when it comes to litigation if anything happens, because if there's a breach, it could either be the Philippines has jurisdiction, but also if their law requires that you report it in that particular jurisdiction, that would also lead to litigation cost. So that would then give you an idea if it's now onshore, what are your compliance costs, in terms of also your egress costs, meaning to say when you want to transfer your data out of your provider to a different provider. Of course, it's more expensive if you're storing it abroad as compared to having it here and then transferring it to another provider. So these are some of the things that companies could now predict, and see, because of course proximity wise you're now closer. You have local staff here. You have local personnel that maintains the data center. What does that entail then? Mean to say you don't have the fluctuating cost or the foreign exchange cost that we don't know. I mean, sometimes you pay a service for a particular thing that needs to be done at a higher price because of the conversion as compared to when it's done here. So um it could improve predictability because again, going back to what I said, you now have more visibility in terms of the sources of cost that impact the entire value. And one last thing before I end what I'm saying, you can now ask for, what do you call that, the pricing chart. It's more reflective now of the actual cost because again, you don't have the foreign exchange, you don't have um fluctuating services. So the contract is tighter in terms of the business costs.
So it's more transparent for.
I would hope so. I would assume that would be the situation ideally. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, to add to what Depcom has said, so as a background, we've run cloud services for almost a decade now, right? And we've dealt with both Western, Eastern brands, and of course us at Converge, right, our own cloud. And number one, from an engineering perspective, right, Depcom is correct. Forex is a very big factor, right? Um, Especially for contracts that, for example, are multi-year. You know, cloud service providers will need to factor in not just the current forex, but a forecast of the forex, and that's typically dictated by geopolitical or global financial situations, etc. And of course, firms will need to buffer for that, right? So that's one. Number two, the localization of talent, right? we need to understand that for global brands, global hyperscaler brands, right? Um, most service providers, they service global companies as well with global footprint, right? So most of the talent are not localized here, meaning physically are not here, or if they are here, of course they charge global prices. So no, so that leads to unpredictability of costs, because of course if I'm a service provider and I have to choose, do I deploy to, to a Philippine organization my talent of like 10, 15 engineers, or there's a better opportunity, say in Australia, with similar workload, but because of the forex and whatnot, there's more money to be made there, right? And thirdly, what leads to cost unpredictability is that, so every project, every cloud migration or cloud services engagement, it starts with baselining, right? You will want to forecast things like, what are my workloads, or what are my applications to run in the cloud in the next 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. The run rate is, say, $1,000 today, but what will it be in the next months? We need to forecast that. But the challenge there is whether, despite doing that baselining, there's still that factor at, for example, you're an e-commerce company and you have a very good, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 11 sale. And all of a sudden, the visitors to your website triple. Then your forecasts are screwed, because you don't know that that will happen, or you did not forecast for that. Then that will screw your forecasts for your cloud. Another thing is, of course, the most offshore cloud providers, they're run by behemoths of the tech space, right? And these are all publicly listed companies with global investors, and they're very, very much driven by the growth of their top line and bottom line, right? And because of that pressure, it's an accepted norm in the industry that, every year there is already an expected increase. Even if they're not announcing it yet, it's an expected increase, a certain percentage. So that needs to be factored. And what happened if, the CFO of the multinational company says, our business is not very good this year. So instead of this expected price increase, it will be this. Right? So if you're tied to these offshore providers, right, we're literally at the mercy of to them in terms of, whatever they want to do, both on the technical level, in terms of features, on the security level, on the financial level, we're at the mercy. That's why it's there's a lot of unpredictability, right? Comparing it now, if you localize it, of course, local players understand the local market. I mean, we're all mostly Filipinos, right? So we understand the local markets in need. So we can really tailor and service, the nuances of of the Philippine market. One last example. I remember, I think it was, I think Kellogg's, a cereal company from the US, right? They tried to expand, for example, in India, launching cereals in India for breakfast. And then I think for like very, very short span of time they ran it, but it became unsuccessful. And then when they did to like analyze why, they learned that the Indian population really want their breakfast hot, right? So it did not fly. So what I'm trying to say is localization is really very important. And I think that's all the more important for cloud.
Got that. So, by my understanding, having a local infrastructure cloud helps in terms of really understanding your market and catering to the growth of your market. Now, speaking of the digital economy, what if we continue to rely on offshore cloud? What does that imply for the local digital economy? And if the country invests heavily in local cloud infrastructure, what risks are you taking on?
Well, if we continue to use offshore um, cloud hosting, and I'm not saying that it's bad, but as you've mentioned, then you eventually companies would eventually lose their bargaining power. You're at, it's either you accept their terms or you don't. And of course, because you need cloud storage, you would. But apart from that, I think it's going to be a missed opportunity for the Philippines. We're going to undercapture the digital economy. I mean to say, what I'm trying to say is we're going to be more of consumers rather than, I don't know, creators.
Correct.
Uh, I mean, there's so much talent in the Philippines. We're very intuitive, we could be creators and capture the bigger digital economy. not just for businesses, not just for resources of the government, but really for the benefit of the entire country and its population. So if we continue to rely on offshore hosting, then I think we will miss that economic opportunity for individuals and for the country itself. But also, I think in terms of, because of course, at the National Privacy Commission, we also require companies to submit compliance. And if we continue to have things hosted abroad, it's going to be difficult, not just for the company, because again, there's going to be an enforcement friction. There might be instances where the regulators are asking for certain documents or pieces of evidence, but then the company is not able to provide that because they're waiting for certain regulatory, I don't know, compliance in the other country or in that jurisdiction. So then it creates an enforcement friction. Then that trickles down to the confidence of the people. They could either say that our regulators are not able to enforce our laws because, you know, we're at the mercy of other companies before our companies that are located here are able to comply with the requirements of certain regulatory bodies. So that would be the possible long-term impact if we continue to subscribe to offshore hosting. But then again, I'm not saying that that's illegal or that's not advisable. It's just that there might be advantages if we do have onshore hosting as regards certain types of data.
Earlier, you mentioned something about opportunity. I wanted to zero in on that. Diplomacy, in terms of the digital economy, what are the opportunities that are present if we adopt also like onshore cloud infrastructure? Like, how will it affect revenues or productivity of players in the Philippine digital economy?
I think it's going to be there's going to be a lot of opportunity if we have the infrastructure both in terms of hosting, connectivity, power, because I think that's going to be an environment that must function all together. So say for example, I think as it currently stands, we're mostly consumers of AI. We're not developers or deployers. I mean, big companies, of course, could venture into developing AI tools, but that's not really available to, I don't know, a small or medium enterprise that's wanting to break into the market of artificial intelligence. So, but when you're able to host your data and hopefully at a cheaper price in the Philippines, then that gives them an opportunity to start, a certain project or a certain tool. So there's a lot of opportunities that could be missed if we don't. I mean, even the fact that, of course, again, we were talking about investment, and that's going to be a big investment for the government and for private companies. But then with those investments, it come opportunities for the small players, it opens certain opportunities for them that we could tap on and then contribute to the revenue of the Philippines coming from the digital space. Because I don't know if we realize, but we're really some of the top users of the online space, whether that's social media, and then now you have your digital payment. So you know we love using our phones. We love being in the online space. So why not limit ourselves to just the social media? Why can't we delve into other things and become creators of anything that would be sellable to the digital space? Yeah.
Instead of being consumers, there's so much missed opportunity in terms of staying on that thing. For the creator, that's the opportunity that's given by having an onshore cloud infrastructure. But for your side, Sir James, in terms of, because you have a lot of clients that are enterprises, so what opportunities do you see for like your clients? I assume a lot of them are part of the digital economy. So what opportunities do you see if we have a local cloud infrastructure in place?
Mhm. I'll start first with, again, numbers. I like numbers. We did an informal study internally when we're doing a business case for our own cloud at Converge, right? And we saw that 75 to 100 billion pesos per year are spent by public sector and enterprises combined for cloud and cloud related services, right? So that's both for computing, storage, security, and the services to run them. And Filipino companies capture a very, very small fraction of that because we don't have a proper, in-country cloud in place. Most of those are actually cloud revenues that we remit outside, right? Because that's powered by offshore cloud providers. So from a business standpoint, that's the opportunity that's missed, right? Government accounts for at 40 to 45% of that spending every year. So in terms of economic impact, that's the economic impact of having a robust and proper, you know, in-country cloud ecosystem, right? And of course, there's a force multiplier there because now you're able to multiply the businesses that are around that kind of ecosystem. Um, for businesses, we believe that that the opportunities that we lost, that we lose, is with regard to having the right size of your IT spend, right? Because of course, right now, if we're heavily dependent on external providers with a different set of costs, there is an opportunity to balance that out, right? Because offshore cloud will never go away. I think that's a fact, right? That's a fact. But I think the key for businesses and even public sector alike is that what is the right mix? Because I think both in country and offshore cloud, there is a point wherein we're able to interconnect them and find the right use cases together. And the blended use of that, I believe, will have both an economic impact to the company, cost savings, etc., but also a computing impact. As Depcom has said, there's lesser latency for in country because data ingress and egress it's physics, right? It's literally in the country, so it's the shorter latency. So there's a lot of opportunities that can be had if we really are able to provide those types of services and make it a hybrid approach.
And if I could zero in on that, if you could give a clear image also of like the blended type of like onshore and offshore cloud infrastructure, how will that work?
Okay.
It that like
For example, so a good example, for example, is in terms of a use case in data redundancy in disaster recovery, right? So, of course, when you're running your infrastructure, right, for any enterprise or public sector agency, disaster recovery, data redundancy is an important facet, right, for security purposes. You want to be able to make sure whatever happens, I have my data backed up somewhere, I have my data stored, I can spin up a new infrastructure in an acceptable SLA, right? Um, that's a very very powerful use case for having an in-country cloud. You know, you because it's something that's relatively um, less computational intensive. It's more storage, right? It's something that a use case that's very powerful to explore for an in-country setup. If companies or public sector agencies will have their data redundancy within the country, spread across the archipelago, I think that is a very powerful use case and has that economic impact. Another also is, for example, your mission critical workloads, you can leave it into your choice of a computing setup, whether that's in your own data center, whether in an in country, or in a public cloud. It's the strategy of the CIO of the organization. But for the other computing workloads, for the ancillary ones, the auxiliary ones, then it's a business decision for the CIO or the CTO where to put it. Do I put it in an in-country? Do I put it in a cheaper cloud? That's a new and upcoming because it's not mission critical. So you can have those choices, right? So there's really a scenario wherein these types of providers can really coexist. Another point is most of the providers have their own strengths. For example, the Eastern brands and the Western brands have their own strengths in terms of AI, in terms of operating at scale, in terms of enterprise capabilities. There are strengths, and I think the strategy now most CTOs, CIOs are taking is that I want to pick from the strengths of this provider. I don't want to get stuck to, this one because I'm very loyal to this one. And same with in country. The strength of in country, I believe, is in terms of costs, in terms of geographically, they're just nearby, less latency. And of course, the support that you also get, are very local. So those types of things.
And just remember, if you don't see their strengths, look at their weaknesses.
Correct, correct, correct. Yes.
Because some of them have been involved in a lot of certain breaches that has affected not different countries. So because sometimes you don't see their strengths.
Mm.
I mean, uh, yeah. I mean, like just look at there's a if you can't see their strengths, look at their weaknesses. I mean, if they've been involved in a lot of controversies, then that's a sign that that's not probably that's not a good provider for certain sensitive functions or matters.
That's the benefit that you can have foreign and also local file infrastructure.
Yeah, I think it will always be a combination of those.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything James have mentioned.
And I also wanted to talk about talent. So if we're going to adopt or push for local cloud infrastructure, how do we ensure that we have talent that is ready to adopt to these kinds of technology? Is there going to be AI in the mix? What will be like the combination of like talent and the talent pool that will be in place for that?
I think then we have to revisit our curriculum. I mean, from the side of the government, it has to be because the way I see it, it has to work hand in hand. We can't expect a good pool of talents if we're not able to give them the education that they need. I mean, like go to other countries, look at their curriculum. They now have programs for kids for AI, for privacy, for cybersecurity, and we have to be able to embed these things and ideas and concepts to our kids at an early stage. Probably not at a very early stage, but at the stage where they're able to comprehend at least start from the basics of online security, privacy, um, uh, how to be safe in the online space, and then of course you move forward to having courses that deals with computing, data analytics, uh, artificial intelligence. So I think from the government, it has to there has to be some changes in terms of what our schools can offer, because, well, to be fair, there are universities and schools that now offer those, but I think that's quite very centered in the metro, in the capital, and we have a lot of talented people, and that goes without saying that these individuals are everywhere in the country. So if we give them the opportunity and the avenue to study these things in their respective universities and their respective state universities or schools in their regions, in their areas, then we're starting to then build and invest on human capital, and on talents rather. Then of course, if you want to venture into a more nuanced or specific area, then we give, I don't know, scholarships for individuals, or either we partner with other governments that to have scholarships, because I for one was a beneficiary of a um government scholarship from abroad, but that is because the Philippines has a partnership with that government. So we have to do more in terms of these things, and then go back to the country, cascade that knowledge for the for the benefit of the country, whether you work for the government or for the private sector.
Yeah. For me, as Depco Museas was speaking, I remember some early researchers that I've seen that in terms of engineering talent in Southeast Asia, Philippines has been quite the laggard, right? I think we need to get it out there, right? So we're not have been investing in engineering talent for decades now. So and I think that's a big gap, right? and the bulk of the very small engineering talent that we have are really geared towards either they want to go abroad, or if they work here, they want to service a very specific niche. So we have a very big talent gap, right? And that takes time to cultivate. So I think we need to have a very big mindset change as a culture. I mean, when we were young, right? When you're good at math, right? People or your playmates or even your uncles, they tease you, right? They call you names, what have you. So I think culturally we need to shift that, right? Because if you want this talent, guess what? This talent will not come tomorrow. It will be a few years before we're able to build it. So we need to have the right mindset, inculcate that right mindset to the young ones, and the right teachers to capacitate them, the right set of, you know, teaching materials, because as you've said, AI is here actually. It's not coming, it's not far into the future, it's here. So we need to be very creative or be very nimble in terms of what we teach our students. AI is not the foe, it's not the enemy. It's an accelerator. I like to think of it as an equalizer, because now you have the entire wealth of human knowledge at your fingertips. It hasn't happened to a country like the Philippines in like forever. The question is how to maximize that. So now the talent question we're able to bridge. We may not feel it very very soon, but we need a systemic change, right? Invest in STEM, right? Yeah, and things like that, right? Unfortunately, it's something that we will not feel soon.
Right.
That's the challenge, right? So we may have these changes in terms of how we teach the children, how to change culturally, but it's something that we will not feel very very soon. So it may feel that it's not working, but we need to keep doing it, right? On the short term, on the very short term, I think it's a chicken and egg, right? Because private companies in the Philippines will have difficulty investing in the talent and the infrastructure if there's no demand. So demand needs to be created, right? And not to put Depco on the spot, but demand in the country usually starts from the government, right?
Right.
Government triggers that. It's the biggest employer in the country. So I think that cycle needs to start so that the chicken and egg problem, gets solved. If there is demand, the private sector companies will invest. If there's an investment, you invest in the right talent. Engineers here realize that they don't need to go abroad to get paid well. They can have the job well here, and then it becomes a cycle, and then it reinforces.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hopefully, some of our government leaders are also listening.
My next question is for Sir James. For Converge, what strategies or expansions are you looking at that align with your push for local cloud infrastructure?
Okay. So last year, our founder and CEO, Mr. Dennis Uy, has announced our transition from being a telco to a techco. And that has came naturally because as you know, in the transition of Converge, especially the last 5-6 years have been, super, right? Its expansion nationwide and the growth of its subscribers, and now the realization of we need to transform ourselves so that we do not end up being dinosaurs in this space. Having said that, part of that strategy is really expanding the footprint of what Converge does in the technology space. And of course, a very big portion of that is computing, right? It is a natural progression for us at Converge, having the backbone, having the internet backbone to have computing as the next evolution. So there is a very big investment coming in now for Converge in the next few years to really invest in the infrastructure, in the talent, and the ability to service local customers, both in the public and private sectors, in this transformation. We have two running data centers now, Tier 3 certified, one in Caloocan and one in Angeles. And we have a number of data centers still planned for rollout in the coming years. Our strategy, a little bit different than the other companies, is that it's more inward looking. As I've said earlier, we want to use our own tools, infrastructures ourselves first before we even sell it to others. So for us at Converge, our transition to TechCo also means we need to be self sufficient, which means our cloud we use, our Converge cloud we use, our new systems that we're rolling out we use. We test it first, and then we offer it to our customers because it's very difficult to dispute an offering if you yourselves are using it. You become your own ambassadors. So that's what we're doing. It's a slow and steady process. Of course, it's a challenging evolution, right? But we're doing it now because as we've said earlier, technology evolves at a very fast pace, and if we don't do it now, we will be left behind.
And that's a great way to end this episode. And as we wrap up, may we get maybe your closing statements, any parting words, or anything that you want our listeners to remember. Thomas, you wanna start?
Well, from a privacy standpoint, of course there are pros and cons when you have an onshore posting and when you do offshore posting, as what we mentioned earlier. I think really the key there is to understand your data. What do you think needs to be hosted onshore, and what needs to be hosted offshore? Because of course, if we're talking about government data, and let's say our national ID data, or our PSA data, that's a different story. But for companies, of course, it's going to be something that you would have to determine whether you would subscribe to an onshore hosting or an offshore hosting. Really, the key there is, and of course, I'm promoting the National Privacy Commission in terms of making sure that you're able to not just comply to the requirements of the commission, but also compliance builds confidence when it comes to your data subjects, and it gives them an assurance, because as I've mentioned earlier, onshore or offshore hosting is not just a technical issue. That's also a matter of perception and assurance for individuals. And we've been talking about these earlier. How do I know that my data is safe? So it's and as you've mentioned, James, it's a matter of really knowing the need of your company in terms of whether you subscribe to an onshore or an offshore posting. But I also would hope that if we actually reach that stage where a lot of companies would invest in terms of onshore hosting, because in terms of prices, if we only have a few players, then that's going to be it's supply and demand. If you have a lot of demand but only a few suppliers, then of course there's the question of competition now. Whether are we promoting just a duopoly or a monopoly, or so I think when there's competition, the market performs better. And then again, that encourages a lot of companies now to then subscribe to onshore hosting, because when there's competition, the companies that offer onshore hosting, you then continue to improve your uh, services, which I think would be eventually great for the entire country, whether that's for the government, because we also subscribe to host providers. As James mentioned, it's a big cost for the government as well. So yeah, and thank you so much for having these topic. I think very timely and they're relevant, especially with what's happening um in the world.
Okay. I guess for me, it will always boil down to strategy, both for the private and the public sector. It needs to boil down to what is the strategy of that organization in terms of its digital transformation process, and that strategy will need to be hinged on what's the objective of that organization, whether it's a business or regulatory agency, an LGU, what's the purpose, what's the intent, and the digital transformation strategy should hinge from that. Because all of these things, in country cloud, offshore cloud, AI, and security. All of these things are tools. They are enablers, and they should be enabling a strategy. That's where companies like us at Converge come in. We help inform the strategy. We help educate our customers what is in the industry now, what is the hot technologies now, and how are they applicable to businesses and organizations and their strategy. And at the end of the day, these things take time. It's a multi-year process. So business owners, policymakers, our leaders will need to be very patient in the transformation journey. It may feel like it's not working, but it just takes a lot of time and effort. And lastly, I guess, as I've said earlier, in any transformation journey, it's a combination of PPT, people, process, and technology. Cloud, whether in country or offshore, it's just a piece of technology. Right? It's a great technology, but it's just a piece of technology. It needs to be coupled with the right set of people doing and involved in the right processes. Without those three, any technology will fail. And of course, very much grateful for having us here. It's a very great conversation, and we hope to have more of these in the future. Thank you.
More than starting conversations on cloud, Converge seeks to help businesses kickstart their journey with cloud technology. For inquiries, email Converge Global Business via globalbusiness@convergeict.com or visit LinkedIn through www.linkedin.com/company/Converge Global Business. For more business insights and in-depth conversations, follow Business World B-Side on Spotify. Stay updated for the latest business stories from Business World on Facebook, X, Instagram, Threads, and LinkedIn. I am Beatriz Cruz, and this is Where the Digital World Converges, Conversations on the Cloud, brought to you by Business World B-Side and Converge. Until the next episode, thank you for tuning in.